today I'm going to be showing you guys at home how to do your very own mason's mitre. Right, so now that we've got our second piece of top cut, we've took ourselves a little bit of off cut, a bit of scrap, which is the same size, and we're just going to lay it across the base there, and that's just going to allow us to sit the second piece on top. So just as this one, we've set this one square to the front of the units, and what we need to do is mark where the two tops, or the two countertops, intersect. So for us that's going to be here. So we're just going to put a pencil mark right between the two counters there. This is a jig from Trend, and the mason's mitre is this here, and what that basically does is that's going to put us a join that comes up and along, and then the next piece will have the mal version of that will slide in, and we bolt it together. So you're going to need yourself a jig like this. We're also going to need ourselves a 1/2 inch router with a 12.7mm flute cutter and a 30mm guide bush. So that's that there, and a couple of clamps. So now that we've got our mark, we need to add a little measurement that we take from our router, which is from the outside of our bush to the edge of the cutter. So we've measured ours and it's come up at 9mm. So what we're going to do, we're going to add that 9mm, we're going to come away from our edge 9mm and put ourselves another pencil line. So ours is here, so we've got a 9mm difference right there. So we bring our jig, and if you look at these Trend jigs, we've got pins, and on the top we have an F90 and an M90. F90, female 90 joint. So this is going to be going into the worktop, so that's female side. So we're going to put our pins in the F90, 1, 2 and 3. Slide that forward, drop our pins in, and as we slide this along, we're going to slide the jig up until the jig hits our second line. So we're right on that now. So all we need to do is clamp this in place. Don't be using it without clamps. We want this to never ever move while we're using it. So we're just going to use these Bessie clamps, making sure that we're still tight and we're still on our mark. Right, so don't rush this process. Double check, triple check, quadruple check. This is super important that this is in the correct position. So double check all your pins are touching the front, which ours are. Our clamps are tight. It's not going to go anywhere, and we're down on our mark that we made the 9mm difference. Right, so the reason we do that spacing is because when these cut, they don't actually cut to the edge of the guide. The guide bush keeps that distance away, so when we plunge down, we're going to be cutting exactly on the mark that we made earlier with our other countertop. Right, so one last check before we plug this in and start routing. Just make sure all our pins are low and nothing's going to get caught, so we're all good. Double check before you plug it in, and now we're ready to plug it in. And the way we're going to be doing this is we're going to be making multiple passes, so we're not going to try and cut through all of this at once. We're going to make a very shallow pass, and that's just going to keep a nice clean edge on the top, and then we'll start dropping it in 10-15mm cuts at a time until we're all the way through. And another tip, we're going to be keeping it on the close edge, so we're going to be keeping it tight, because as you can see there's just a little bit of slack in these jigs, so we're going to be keeping it tight to us until the last pass, and then we're going to go tight to the very back, and that's just going to give us a nice clean cut all the way through. So let's get this plugged in. Depending on your router, there's a couple of ways you can do this. So our router, you plunge down to your required depth, and there's a lock on the side, and that's going to hold it into our first position. And a lot of routers now, they have this step, so you can step it down in increments without adjusting anything. So it's got a stop on the side. So as we plunge our first cut, we lock it off, and then as we come through for our next passes, we just adjust this stop here, and it will go deeper and deeper. Or you can just leave this off and adjust it by eye, roughly 10-15mm increments. That's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to do our first pass now of around 3 to 5mm. Remembering, as we do our first few passes, we're going to be favouring this front edge towards me. Right, so now that we've done our scoring pass, our shallow pass, we're now going to drop it 10-15mm. One thing to note, I'm cutting in at the face first and coming around and out while the cutter's spinning clockwise, because that's going to give us the cleanest edge, and we're not going to have any breakout if we come in from the faces. That's why we've set the jig up like this. So when we do the opposite one, we'll actually be cutting on the underside. So let's get these cuts made. Right, so we've done our multiple cuts. We've now got around 5mm of top left. So we're going to go all the way through, and now we're going to favour the back edge. We're going to be pushing against the jig, and that should leave us with a nice clean finish. Right, so as you can see, we've got our mason's mitre now, and the difference between our original mark and the mark we made now becomes clear. So we finished on our original mark, and that was the 9mm we added for our bushing over there. So this is the first one, the female. So now we're going to go and mark out and get ready to do our male. Right, so now that we've got this section of countertop back in, we've got ourselves some scrap underneath. We're going to slide our second part up over the top into position, making sure we're nice and flat. So we've lined up the corner, and we're going to take a very sharp pencil, and we're going to mark the underside of our next piece, and that's going to give us the location of our male mitre. Right, so we've got our countertop outside. This one is now upside down, so this is the underside. So what we've done is we've flipped our jig, and what we're looking for is an M90. So we've put our pins on the M90, and we've also made ourselves some marks for that 9mm difference that we've got on our guide bush. It's exactly the same with the other one, just we're all upside down now. The only difference is, what I've done with this jig is I've put myself some pilot holes in here, and I'm going to put some screws through the jig into the waste piece that we'll be cutting off, and that's going to prevent it from snapping and damaging the underside, which is now the top. Right, so our jig is all set, it's clamped, it's secure, it's not going to go anywhere, and if you want, you can just double check by plunging your router down with it switched off, and you could just see that that cutter is touching our original scribe line, so we've set our jig correctly. So we're going to come back to the start and start making our multiple passes all the way through, and then leave a nice shallow section at the face, because that is the top of this one and we want to really look after it. Right, so that's it. We've worked our way through most of the material, so now it's time for our final pass. So we're going to be nice and gentle with this and take our time, because obviously rather than that being the bottom, that is now the face, the very top. So let's get that done. So we can now remove the waste section that I screwed in. That's why I do it, so we've had nothing drop off and cause damage to the top. And we'll remove the jig and check what it's looking like. Right, so we've got our piece into position. We're going to slide it up, check that our miters are good, and yeah, they're going to be great once we get the bolt holes and bolted up and glued. So before we get on with that, we need to trim any excess, because we left this section long. So for us, we're going to be matching the front overhang, so we'll get that cut down, and then we'll start marking out for our bolt. So we've measured and marked the overhang we want left. So I put our marks on, sat our track on the top against our marks, and we're just going to score the top with a really slight cut. And now we're going to get ready to go through full depth. The reason we put that score cut in is it just leaves a nicer cut on the top. It prevents the chipping out of our top surface. So we're going to slide those up, double check we're happy with our joint, and now we need to move on to the slots for our bolts that go underneath. So the jigs do come with a template to put them in set places, but what I like to do, I get a pencil, I go underneath, and I'm going to scribe across the two pieces in the open section of cabinet. So this is the top, the smaller section upside down, and we've got the two spaces, so the two marks that indicate the space underneath that's open. That's close enough to the edge that I'm going to be using that space to cut our slots. So if we take our jig and we're going to place our pins into the B slots, and all I'm going to do, I'm going to line the edge of this left one up, cut that out, and then I'm going to move to the edge of this side, cut this one out, and then I'm going to put one in the center, and I'm going to do exactly the same on that side. So let's get this clamped down and cut. So like the joint, we're going to do this in a couple of passes, and we're going to set this to 20mm, which is halfway. So what I've done, I've just put myself a little pencil line at 20mm, half the depth of the counter itself, and we're just going to follow the guide bush again. So that's what we're looking for. That's the pocket we need. So I'm going to do the rest. Just remember, the most important part of this is, one, the depth. We need to be at least sort of halfway, and two, they need to match from one side to the next. That's why we drew across the pair. So let's get the rest of these done. And now we've got the opposite piece, and again we're going to go to our marks, making sure they're in the identical positions of the smaller section. And now we're going to rat out these bolt holes. Right, so our parts are in place. Our bolt holes are now cut into the back, the little slots. So these are the bolts we're going to be using. And what we do, we take the bolt, we slide it into this plastic sleeve. So once we've slid the black sleeve over the bolt like so, we come to one side of our side and we slide it up and inside, and we push that sleeve up inside tight. Right, so now that our bolts are in place, I've put something inside the cupboard to protect the unit, because now we're going to be applying glue to the whole face of both of our joints. Like so. And if we can just use our finger or a brush if you like. We're just going to spread that across the whole joint. Right, now that our glue's in place, we're going to lift our second piece up and over our bolts and then slowly down into position, lining our joint up. And then what we need is a 10mm open-ended spanner like that, and we're going to start tightening our bolts up from underneath. Right, so what we're doing as we're tightening the bolts, we're making sure we're as flush as we can possibly get. With oak you might not get it 1,000,000% all the way through, but we're just going to adjust each section where each piece of bolt is. So we'll get this bit kind of tight, then we'll get the back, then we'll adjust the middle, and then we'll keep clamping until the two pieces pull nice and tight. And if you follow all of those steps, you should end up with a lovely mitre like this. And if you want to see the full install on this kitchen, go check out the video. Remember, like, comment and subscribe. Peace!